Welcome to episode 5 of Is It Really a Great Idea? In my class at SMU this week, we were talking about how every startup idea starts not with your product, but with your customer and then the pain that they have and the BCA, the best current alternative, what they use today to alleviate that pain. We even talked about whether it's pain or gain. And it's not just the customer, it's actually the right customer. And that is kind of what inspired today's episode. So what I'll talk about today is how to define first the difference between what a customer and what a user is. Then I'll talk about the discovery process. And the discovery process starts with you in identifying who would be a good customer for you to pursue. And you do that at your home and in your office, in your garage. Then we'll talk about how to tell if what you're doing is chasing a pain that they currently have or a gain that they want to achieve. We'll talk about interviewing process, suggested questions, tips, and mistakes that are often done. And we'll compare 3 different techniques. We'll compare surveys with interviews and individual interviews and with focus groups. Let's get started right after this. Welcome to Is It Really a Great Idea? I'm Yoram Solomon, entrepreneur, author, and professor of entrepreneurship in one of the top US MBA programs. This podcast is based on my textbook by the same name. But I didn't write it to inspire you to chase your dreams. I wrote it to help you kill bad ideas fast so you can get to the one that's actually worth your time, your energy, your money, and your obsession. Most entrepreneurs fall in love with their idea too early. I want to help you fall in love with the truth. Because before you build a business, pitch investors, or write a single line of code, you have to ask yourself, is it really a great idea? Okay, first we have to start with one of my pet peeves, and that is the distinction of what a customer really is. And I guess that the best way to describe it is, and I do that in class a lot, I ask people to, as we define customer and, the demographics, the psychographics, everything, I ask them to define the Facebook customer. And so what they start saying is, well, it's somebody older because apparently young people don't use Facebook anymore. I do, but I'm not young. So they start describing essentially me. So, an older person, a person that is involved with the community and so on. And they go into the details and they believe that they do a great job, except for one thing. I ask them, what is a customer? What does it mean to be a customer? And then when we check the dictionary definition, we find that customer is one that purchases a commodity or service. Purchases, pays. I'm not paying for Facebook. That means that I'm not a customer. I am a user. I'm not the person you're trying to solve a problem to build your own business. To build your own business, you need to solve a problem or provide a gain or some kind of fulfill a desire for someone who's willing to pay. If that person is not willing to pay, they're not your customer. They are a user. And the users, you know what they are? I'm not discounting users because I am a user. But I like this phrase, this quote that I can't find for the life of me who said it initially. But if you don't know what the product is, you might be the product. The user is the product. The user is what, or access to the user is what Facebook sells. It's what LinkedIn sells. It's what Google sells. They sell access to users. The users are not the customers. Yes, we may need to attract users because it's like building a product or building a service. That's how you attract them. That's how you build your product, by having more users. But who you sell to is the customer, and that's who you need to focus on. Okay, that's it. I'm off my soapbox. I'm done with that pet peeve. Let's continue. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the discovery process. The discovery process is really the setup for your idea. Now, often you will start with having an idea, but you still need to go through this process in this order, in this very specific order. This is not described possibly good enough in the book, in the textbook. Is it really a great idea? But that means that there's going to be a second edition of the book where I will describe the discovery process. So I'm identifying 5 steps in the discovery process that leads to the point where you need to come up with an idea. So up until now, you're not supposed to have an idea. And if you have an idea, use it only to give you the context, not to actually define everything. So we start with, let's choose a high potential customer. We need to find a customer. And I'll talk about each one of those steps separately, but right now I'm just going to go over the entire process. So we find a high potential customer. Then we explore their world. This is where we get out of our office and we start talking to them. As we explore their world, there are a couple of questions we need to answer. One of them is, do they have a pain or a gain? So are we looking at a pain that they have or a gain that they desire? And is it felt, currently experienced, or is it undeniable? And I'll talk more about that. We'll talk about each one of those blocks separately. Then once we explore that pain and gain, once we decide whether we're exploring a pain or a gain and a felt or an undeniable, because there are different ways to explore them, that's when we need to also explore what is their BCA, the best current alternative. What are they using today? Once we have the answer to those questions, so first who the customer is, which allows us to go out and explore their world. Then, are we looking at a pain or a gain, a felt or an undeniable? That allows us to explore that pain or gain. And then, so what are they doing today? What's their best current alternative? Once we're done with all of that, we sit down and ask, what idea do we have? How do we come up with an idea? In this episode, I'm not going to spend too much time in describing the customer and all the customer filters. I promise I will do that in a later episode that focuses only on that. At this point, we're just talking about the customer discovery and the discovery process. So first of all, it starts with you. This is not something where you go outside to find your customer. You have to know which customer you're going to go after. And I like to refer to it as part of your own unfair advantage. You may have an unfair advantage. I have an unfair advantage with a group called the National Speakers Association. Why is that? Because I know many of them, because many of them know me, because I have ways to contact them, because I'm with them at different groups, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, and even if I left the National Speakers Association today, I'm still connected to so many. That gives me an advantage. I am also a hobbyist in building and flying radio-controlled airplanes. People know me there. I know a lot of people. I know where to advertise to them. I know them well enough to know where to take an idea if I had one. And I did have one at some point, which again, in a future episode, I'll talk about that when I talk about how to know how many are out there. So that is an advantage that you have with a specific group. You know, someone from the outside that says, I want to sell something to members of the National Speakers Association, they don't have the advantage that I do. So ask yourself, what kind of industries, what kind of hobbies, what communities do I belong to? People that I really do understand very deeply, because I've lived through their problems. We lived through the same problems. And those are people that already trust me, people who think that I'm credible, people who already know me. And you know that trust to me is a big deal, not to mention the fact that my other podcast is called The Trust Show. And not to mention that I have the word trust tattooed on my left arm. So, they already trust me because they know me, and that's a big part of it, because I contributed a lot to, whether it's the National Speakers Association, whether it's to the to groups like RC groups, where there are a lot of people who build RC planes, and they know that I contribute a lot, so they listen to me. So those are things that give me an advantage. And this could be people that often come to me for help or for advice, which kind of already gives me an indication that these are people that it will be easier for me to sell to compared to others. So the first step of your discovery, or specifically the customer discovery, is that you need to list those groups, those communities, those hobbies, industries, or whatever, where you are one of them, where it's going to be easy for you. So make a list of, 3 to 5 groups like this based on that you're connected to, based on experience, identity, network, or anything else. So you start by making this list. Now, you don't need to leave the office for that. You really don't. I mean, this is something that you can do by yourself. You may want to have somebody as a sounding board and tell them, here are the people that I'm thinking about. Or have someone say, hey, but aren't you a member of XYZ, whatever it is? Those will help you once it's time to do the deep customer evaluation, the 5 filters. So, your customer understanding, the trust and credibility that they may have in you, access and proximity, segment clarity, strategic size and value. So all those things combined are going to be the easiest to get very high grades on, very high scores on, if those are in one of those 3 to 5, whatever groups or communities that you're a member of. So the first step in the discovery is discover the customer. You don't have to leave your home, your office, your garage, wherever you start your business at. You don't have to leave. This is something that you do on your own. For the next part, you have to leave your office, home, garage, or anywhere you're working on your idea. This is the time to spend time with the potential customer. You may have to spend time with more than one group of customers until you decide this is who I want to work on. As I said before, you may have started with an idea, and in most cases, this is what happens. You just need to remember, if you started with an idea, to not let it take over. Don't fall in love with it. Let it guide you through who the customer, what the pain or gain is, and what the BCA is, but be willing to abandon it. But this is the time for you to go out and start meeting with potential customers. Steve Blank said that. Eric Ries said that. Mark Cuban says that. Everyone will tell you, every good, successful entrepreneur will tell you, this is the time you need to start spending time with the customer. Not locked on your idea, but to do the discovery with the customer. And so what we're discovering right now is, one, do they have a pain, or are you going to offer them, or do they need or want a gain? So the first thing that's really important is really to answer that question. And I'm going back to something that I said in one previous episode, and that is, what do you have? Do you have a painkiller, a vitamin, or a candy? And, it's kind of funny. When I wrote the book, I was still under the same theme that everybody in my life, in the entrepreneurship theme, always told me, are you going with a candy or a vitamin? Are you going with a painkiller or a vitamin? And what they meant really is, a painkiller is something that stops an immediate pain that is felt, that is currently felt. I feel the pain. Vitamin is something that will potentially prevent pain in the future. I added to that, and I'm not the first one to add this, candy. How about candy? Is what you're offering candy. Now, typically, if you ask someone, they will immediately know that what you want to achieve is, what you want to build is a painkiller, not a vitamin, not candy. However, Just an interesting statistic since we use those words in this analogy. In 2024, the global painkiller market was $89 billion. In the same year, the global vitamin market was $155 billion, almost double. And a year earlier, 2023, the global candy market was over $213 billion. So we sell more candy than vitamins, and we sell more vitamins than painkillers. Just saying. But in essence, to be serious, what I mean is that you have to don't abandon your idea because what you're delivering is candy. Candy is important too. Doesn't have to be a painkiller. So that's the first thing that I want you to keep in mind. So you need to identify, to answer this question, do they have a pain or am I offering them pleasure or gain? Okay, both of them are viable, but through the interviews, through interacting with them, you need to find one of those. You need to find a pain or find a gain. The next question to answer is whether that pain or gain is felt, currently experienced, or is it undeniable? Both are good, and I'll talk about them. So let's start with this question. Can they currently feel or experience a pain or a desire for something? If the answer to that is yes, they currently feel it, there is a high certainty that you will have a high certainty in your solution, assuming that your solution will address that pain or that gain in an effective and efficient, in a high value way compared to the BCA, compared to the best current alternative, what they have today. However, there is a but. There is a higher risk of competition. If they are aware of it, they're probably already looking for a solution. Whether that solution is duct tape or something else, you're not the only person who would know about it. Others would know. Why? Because it's experience, because they talk about it, because they know that it's there, whether it's pain or their desire for a certain gain. So if the answer is yes, high certainty that if you have a good solution, they will buy it because they're feeling the pain or the desire, but also a high risk of competition. But let's say that the answer is no. Can you feel the pain? No, can't feel it. Let's ask a second question. The second question is, once you describe to them what a gain can be or what pain they might be feeling, they may not know that they're feeling the pain. They may have gotten used to feel it. And I think I told you that story before when Maya, my older daughter, was, I think, about 4 or 5. Grandpa and Grandma came over and were swinging her from her arms until all of a sudden she was in pain. And what happened was one of her elbows got dislocated. Now, I'm not telling you this to make Grandma and Grandpa feel guilty. I'm telling you this because what she did was she stopped using her right arm, because as long as her right arm was hanging down, she did not feel the pain. So if I would have asked her, are you in pain? She may have said, no, I'm not in pain. But the reason is because she got a way around it. And that happens with people as well. We may not know that we're experiencing pain. So, and it goes back to Henry Ford, who said, if I would ask people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. But if I go back to the pain definition, if you ask them, do you have pain with the horse? I'm not sure that they would be able to describe it until they knew that there could be an alternative. So when you describe to them a potential pain that they might be feeling now, they just are unaware of it or never thought about it or got used to it, or a gain, some pleasure that they might get, when you describe it to them and they say, yeah, no, I don't really feel that, or I don't really need that, or I don't really want that, well, that's a dead end. That's a solution looking for a problem. And you know what? Later, we'll talk about solutions looking for a problem, and you'll see that even that is a viable alternative, but just not in this market, not for this pain or that gain. Okay, but if you ask them if they can feel the pain or the desire and they say no, but when you describe to them a potential desire or a potential pain that they might be feeling just not aware of, and they go, oh yes, I do feel that. Oh yes, this is annoying. Or, oh, I would love to get this or do that. That's gold. That's gold because, first of all, the certainty is moderate because, they just got aware. They just became aware that they have a pain or they have a desire that they didn't think about before. So we got to worry that maybe that's what they're saying right now, but, later when they think about it a little more, they're going to go, well, actually, it's not that big a deal. So we have to keep that in mind, that the certainty that you're going to come up with an answer, a solution for a pain or a gain, that the certainty is moderate. It's not high. But the competition risk is much, much lower than if they already know that they have that pain or have that desire. So, and that's why I'm saying that it's gold, because gold is when you come up with something that nobody even knew that they needed, but they can't live without it. They just can't live without it. Some examples that I have are the iPhone. Nobody ever said, oh, what a pain it is to use the current phones that have no apps and have no music stored in them. Nobody said that until the iPhone was introduced. Nobody said that they needed Instagram. Nobody said they needed Uber. We had taxi cabs. We had trains. We had buses. There were things, and we just didn't know how much of a pain it was until somebody came up with Uber, and we went, oh my God, this is, from this moment on, that's all I'm going to use. I asked my student this last week if anybody has ever used taxi cabs. I was actually surprised that even though they're master MBA students or graduate students, I was surprised that many of them have used taxi cabs. And then I said, from the moment you started using Uber, have you ever used taxi cab? And a few of them raised their hands. And I was like, well, that's a shocker. I mean, once you go Uber, how do you go back from that? Well, the answer was interesting. Try getting an Uber in New York City. I actually did get an Uber in New York City. It wasn't that big a deal. But in New York City, it's a lot easier to get a taxi cab. So it doesn't always work. But in general, once you got Uber, people said, we're not going back. Same with the car. Once the first car was introduced, how can you go back? So the first step for you in the discovery process is to figure out who your customer is. You do that at home. The second step is you start talking to them and you're starting to feel if there is a pain or a gain that they currently feel, or especially if you already had an idea, try to describe to them a pain that they have and see if it's undeniable. If they go, oh my God, you're right. I never thought about it. It bugs me so much. You're right. Or if there's a desire where they're going to go, oh my God, if you can deliver this to me, I would love that. I will pay anything that you ask. So, but that's again, those two things you find only when you're out there with the customers and you're spending time with them. And a little later, we'll talk about how. So you're still out with the customer and you have identified whether they have a pain or a gain, whether they feel it currently, experiencing it, or it's undeniable. If it's neither, then you don't have anything. And at that point, you move on to the third thing that you want to understand, and that is what is their best current alternative, the BCA. So their best current alternative is what the customer uses today to solve a very specific problem. Whether it's intentional or not, they're just used to do it a certain way. It could be a high tech, or it could be just duct tape. Now, here's something that I want you to take for granted. There is always a best current alternative. There is something always. And with my students, I ask the question, what's the current, for each one of the following solutions, I'm looking at the slide that I used for them. Who is the customer? What's their pain or gain? Is it failed or undeniable? What was the BCA, the best current alternative? And the examples are Uber. What is the best current alternative? For the most part, taxi cabs. Grammarly. How do you fix your grammar? Meditation apps. Electric toothbrushes. There is a best current alternative to electric toothbrushes. Most people still use it, and that's a non-electric, a regular toothbrush, and so on and so forth. So there's always something. And why does it matter to find it? Because the value of your product is not measured in a vacuum. It's measured relative to the existing solution, to what they're currently using. If your idea or your solution is not going to be clearly better than the BCA, then it doesn't have value. You're not going to build a business on it. Now, you can't evaluate your product if you don't know how they use, if you don't watch how they use the best current alternative. So, how do you find the best current alternative? The first question you have to ask is, what is the function that it does? Or what is the function that's required? So let's take an electric toothbrush, okay? What is the function that it does? Well, it brushes your teeth. It's not even brushing your teeth. It's cleaning your teeth. And it's an important distinction that I made here, because we would often, if I would, I made the same mistake. If I would ask someone, what does an electric toothbrush do? What is the function? The answer will be it brushes the teeth, but the answer is really not that it brushes the teeth, but rather that it cleans my teeth. Why is that important? Because there are alternatives that don't brush, like those high water pressure things. I don't know how they're called. So they're not brushing. If I ask you what this does, it's not brushing, but it's there. And it is a current alternative. Maybe not the best one, but it is a current alternative, and it exists. Frankly, even if I say clean your teeth, I might be already too narrow in my definition. Keeping my teeth healthy. How's that? Not sure that there is something in that distinction, but you want to try and define it as broadly as possible. What are they using now? Just ask. If you know what the feature is, and the feature is cleaning my teeth, I'll stick with that, cleaning my teeth, then the question you have to ask is, how are you cleaning your teeth now? Now, again, your product is not going to be as good as you think it is once you compare it to a BCA. The BCA is the status quo, and we'll talk about that when I talk about value. It's that equilibrium point. It's what we're used to. It doesn't have to be another product from another company. It doesn't have to be from a competitor. This is how they use it to get the same value that you want to offer them. And it also kind of sets the baseline to how much they're willing to pay for it. Now, here's an important thing to keep in mind. It may not be a single product. It may be a combination of products. So, for example, it can be that if I'm looking at a financial, if I'm looking at Intuit or more specifically QuickBooks, their tool, well, it generates invoices, and it does timesheets, and it generates reports. Currently, there is no other tool, or let's just say that there is no other tool that does all three of them. When you want to compare let's say that we are the ones who came up with the idea for QuickBooks, if we would compare it only to a tool that generates the invoices, and we say, well, we can generate invoices, but we can also do something else. If we compare it to a tool that does timesheets and we say, well, we do timesheets, but we also generate invoices and we create reports and so on, you're not really comparing your product to the best current alternative. The best current alternative might be a combination of tools that they use today. They use one tool for generating invoices, one tool for generating timesheets, one tool for generating reports. They use all three of them. But now that you're comparing your product to all three, maybe your biggest advantage is just that it's all in one, that it's one user interface, that it's whatever. And we'll talk about that when we compare value. But be very careful not to compare it to only a partial best current alternative. Okay, so the first thing, after you define your customer, because that you have to do by yourself, this starts with you. After you define your customer, it's time for you to, pardon my language, get your ass out of your office, out of your home, out of your garage, and spend time with them. Not 5 minutes. You have to spend a lot of time with them. You need to interview them. You need to observe them, because sometimes you're going to get a lot through observation as opposed to collecting information by simply asking them. Now, somehow, most entrepreneurs, or I should say many entrepreneurs, decide not to get their ass out of their offices. So what do? How do they collect information? With surveys, online surveys. We're going to send the survey out to people, and we're going to get everything from them, all the information we need. It's probably not the right approach. So first of all, I want to compare and contrast surveys versus doing things in person. And I'm going to do that along, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different dimensions that I put together in a table. So first, the depth of insight. Survey gives you a very low depth of insight. The questions are predefined. You cannot clarify, you cannot explore. In person, you have a much higher depth of insight because you can probe, you can peel the onion, not unpeel, you can peel the onion. It's more exploratory. You can follow up with questions. You can see emotional cues. Flexibility. Survey is fixed. The responses are constrained by the survey design. In-person interview, it's adaptive. You can change the flow based on the answers. You can have follow-on questions because they gave you a certain answer. Nonverbal feedback. How do you get nonverbal feedback in a survey when they chose one of 5 options? But you can get body language, hesitation, enthusiasm when you interview someone in person. You know, if you ask a question in a survey, would you be interested in X, whatever X is? I'm not talking about X, formerly known as Twitter, but in something. In a survey, the answer is going to be yes or no, or to some degree. In an interview, in person, this can be, oh my God, are you kidding me? Is this even possible? That tells you a lot. Let's talk about, the bias risk. Actually, when you're in person, when you interview someone in person, there's a higher risk of an interviewer bias because you may end up having leading questions unintentionally, most likely, but you're going to lead them to a certain answer. Whereas with a survey, because it's less personal, the bias is not felt if you design it well. Scalability. In person is very time consuming. It's one-on-one. It's very low scalability, whereas a survey, very high scalability. You can reach a lot of respondents quickly. The quality of the response. Survey, maybe a little surface level, maybe a little rushed, lack context, whereas the in-person interviews are rich. They're story-based. They're behavior-driven. Usefulness for a minimum viable product or to understand the BCA, the best current alternative. Very poor in a survey because it's hard for you to understand current behaviors, but very high for in-person because you can identify workarounds, actual behavior, observe them, nuance. Trust building, very little with surveys. It's very impersonal, very one-directional, but very strong in person because you are building rapport. You can lead and to repeat conversations or referrals to other people to interview. So what are they best used for? A survey would be to testing assumptions after the discovery, scaling down metrics, narrowing it down now that you have volume. But you do in person to explore unknowns, to validate pain and gain, to identify the BCA. Later, I'll talk more specifically about when do you use each one of the three, because I'm going to contrast individual interviews with focus groups. So in terms of depth, focus group is broader, but you have less depth because you're talking to multiple people, whereas individual interviews are deep. They're very personalized. The comfort level of an individual interview is high. It's more honest. There's less pressure, less peer pressure. In focus group, the comfort level is lower. There is a risk of groupthink and silence. Follow-on questions, easier in interview. You can dig deeper. Focus group, it's a little hard because you have multiple voices there. Logistics, individual interviews are very time-consuming because it's one-on-one with every person. More efficient with focus groups, like 6 to 8 people. There is a bias risk that's lower for individual interviews because there you have no peer influence. But there's higher with the focus groups. I think that what I'm going to do now is I want to just give you the table of, go over the table of when to use each one of them, because we're almost at the 40-minute mark. So what I'll do is I'll talk specifically about interview questions in the next episode. How about that? Well, you can't answer, but that's my decision. So when do you use surveys, interviews, or focus groups? And I'll start with the situation, and then I'll show you which one would be best here. If you want deep, emotional, story-based insights, use the interviews. That's the best. You can explore motivations. You can feel, sense, emotion. Followed by focus groups, sometimes only if you got it well, very shallow in surveys. Now, if you need quantifiable data from a large group, then surveys are the best. They're fast, they're measurable, they're very scalable. Focus groups are not scalable. Interviews are just too small scale. How about if the topic is sensitive or personal? The best would be one-on-one interviews when you build trust. Surveys, anonymity helps, but the depth is going to be very limited. And plus, they may not trust the anonymity of your survey. Focus groups. People may hold back because there are other people in the room. When you need, or when you're still exploring what the problem really is, user interviews are best. They're flexible. You can have follow-up questions, followed by focus groups. They can help surface. They can help surface some unexpected patterns, but some. User surveys are just too rigid. They need predefined options. If you're testing how common something is, user interviews are very non-representative. Even focus groups are just too few people to generalize, but surveys are ideal because they let you measure a lot of things on a lot of people. When you want to observe a group dynamics or shared language, obviously focus group is the best because you can see how people influence and interact with one another. Whereas surveys, they don't give you that, and user interviews you don't see dynamics. When you want to iterate and adjust your questions in real time, user interviews let you do that. Moderated sessions allow you to do that to some extent, not so much with surveys. And finally, when you have limited time and you need a lot of data, surveys are the best. You get fast and a lot of responses. Focus groups take time to recruit and run efficiently. Interviews, again, too much time spent on a single person. Today, we talked about the discovery process, starting with you, the entrepreneur, and the groups that you already know, because that's where you have the advantage. We looked at how to define your customer, the difference between a customer and a user, and how to think about pain, gain, whether it's felt or undeniable, and the best current alternative. But we're not done yet. There are still a few practical tools that I wanted to cover today. I even said that at the opening, but we didn't get to it because we're already starting to go long. So things like the common mistakes that entrepreneurs make in surveys, interviews, or focus groups, the kind of questions that you want to be asking. And one of my favorites is the 5 whys technique. And you'll see that because we'll dive into all of that in the next episode. Falling in love with your idea is easy. Killing it when you should, now that's the hard part. That's why I'm here. Before you waste another dollar, another hour, another ounce of your passion, ask yourself, is it really a great idea? What do you want to know about evaluating ideas, testing them, and figuring out if they're worth building? I'd love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@isitreallyaGreatIdea.com. If you found this episode helpful, subscribe, rate the show, and leave a review. That's how others find it, and how more bad ideas die before they waste your time. For books, workbooks, keynotes, and tools to help you validate your next big idea, visit isitreallyaGreatIdea.com. Remember, falling in love with your idea is easy. Killing it when you should, that's the hard part. Thanks for listening to Is It Really a Great Idea?